Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this most important hearing, you and the ranking member and members of this committee for being here. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here as well. I agree with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. We have a major challenge at our borders. I just got back again from visiting the border. Been to El Paso many times, San Isidro many more times, and I've kind of grew up in that area. And if I can, I'm going to have the clerk show some photos I took at the San Isidro border crossing of the latest number of refugees that we have at the border crossing. Drum roll. While we get there, let me say that since my time is running, what I observed were 1,000 Ukrainian refugees coming into Tijuana on a daily basis. About 500 of them are actually passed into the U.S. under temporary protective status. And Title 42 is also being waived for them right now to come into the United States. So my question, Mr. Secretary, how do you distinguish one group of refugees from another? Why don't you do the same thing for Afghanistan, Syrians, Africans, Central Americans? I guess my bigger question would be, sir, what's our American refugee policy? Now I'd have to ask for my colleagues here too. The UN yesterday reported that this year, 8.3 million Ukrainians will leave Ukraine. What's going to happen when we have 1 million to 2 million Ukrainians knocking at our border? And then, of course, what's going to happen, sir, when we have a few million starving Russians also knocking at our border? And the question really not for you, but for us is, what is our refugee policy in this country? We know what the law is right now, and Title 42 is really something that's been used incorrectly to address immigration at our borders, the refugee issue. This is nothing new. I just read something today that there's discussion now of a Marshall Plan for Central Europe to stabilize that region. Good idea. Why haven't we done that decades ago for Central America? If we have unstable economies that are crashing, we have challenges at the border, and those surges, gentlemen, didn't start this administration. They've been going there for 20, 30 years. Why haven't we acted on those issues? Folks come to our country the way our ancestors came to this country. Economic refugees or political refugees. So, Mr. Secretary, what is our refugee policy when we have 1 million to 3 million Afghanistans, Ukrainians, Russians knocking at our borders? What's our policy? What's the solution? And I want all of us to answer that question. Or do we turn them away? Did we get the photos up? Please answer the question, sir.
Congressman, the President has spoken very powerfully about what our policy is, and that is that we are restoring...
I can address my colleagues. Here's a picture of the Ukrainian refugees at a Tijuana baseball field that the Mexican government graciously made available to these refugees.
We are restoring our leadership in the world as a country of refuge. And in fact, for the Ukrainians who have fled Ukraine in a time of brutal war, we have established a multi-part plan. Number one is our traditional refugee processing, and we deployed refugee affairs officers to the region to administer that. Number two, the Department of State issued guidance with respect to the availability of visas for Ukrainian nationals who qualify. Third, we announced this past Monday, Uniting for Ukraine, a special humanitarian parole program that requires a sponsor here in the United States, which is another lawful and orderly and humane way for Ukrainians to seek refuge in the United States. Those are three different avenues by which Ukrainians seeking refuge can actually obtain it in the United States.
Mr. Secretary, that is in the American tradition of opening our doors to those that are being persecuted, fleeing violence and war. That's what we should do. But it should not be limited just to Ukrainians, Russians, but it should be a blanket policy for the rest of the world. We need those workers. Chambers of Commerce are saying we need that workforce now.
Gentleman's time has
Thank you, Mr.
expired.
Chairman. I yield.